name of the Father, and the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Today we have Dr. Mark Andrawis with us, and we have already 2 seminars in the past, and today's seminar will be about the spirituality and the rites of the Pascha week and the Holy Week. There's so much information. The resources is huge, and we're going to see the progress, how we started in the past and how we end up what we celebrate and what we have in our hands nowadays. It didn't happen overnight, but we're going to see part of the history, how this evolved, how the prayers, how the Holy Week evolved to what we celebrate nowadays in the Coptic Orthodox Church worldwide. Dr. Mark is, I know he's a very academic, very thorough in his studies that I know. So we will listen to Mark, and questions will be just held until we finish. I know the timing, we are 45 minutes behind. And this topic is not an easy topic. I would recommend, if we have to leave in 1 hour, and I know Mark maybe needs hour and a half, my suggestion, maybe we'll split it into 2 sessions. If it's a good, what do you think? Everybody, are you okay with that? We can split it into 2 sessions. So we can start today. If next week is fine, or in 2 weeks, we can resume again, because I don't want to rush, and I don't want to give you a material that worth like 2 hours worth in 1 hour. Okay? We have the time. I know today we have so many events, and most of you maybe were busy or something, and then the computer gave us some technical issues. Thank God it's resolved, but we'll take it from here in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen.
Thank you, Abuna. So the screen is a little bit dark. If you can't see, I think the screen is very clear. So if I removed whatever was in your way, but there's not I think the red writing isn't showing up, but there's not a lot of red text in the presentation. So I'm going to talk today about Holy Pascha week, and when you Google anything, or you pick up the first book you see in a bookstore, really the most common books or the most common writings about this week have to do with correlations of the day and the spirituality of the day. And there's a lot of resources around this, but it's a little bit scarce when you're looking into the history of how the week came about, what it was before, what it is today. Who were the people that contributed in what we have today as a Holy Week. So I'm going to try to focus a little bit on this. And I'm going to dig into, we're going to go back forward to Moses' time to see how this week came about over the years. So the agenda today, I'm going to talk about the origins of Pascha, the term and its different meanings. There's this concept that you find in the historical books of passion to passage. And I think that those 2 terms resonate a little bit on what the Holy Pascha week is. Why the Passover time? And I think that's really important. That really sheds a lot of light into what we have today. From Pascha days to Pascha week, or from a celebration of a 2-day time to a celebration of a full week. And then we're going to touch on some rites at the end as to why we do things the way that we do it. So I'm going to start with Pascha, and the terminology. I'm sure anytime you hear a lecture about Pascha week or Holy Week, the interest typically, what does the word Pascha mean? And when you dig into a little bit of historical references here, you find that it meant different things at different times, and it's interesting because it's a word, so it's got to have one meaning, but in Exodus, or during the time of Moses, when he went to Pharaoh and God told him as to what he's going to be doing, the word meant, the Jews at this time took it as the feast of the Passover. That's what it was. It meant the Passover itself, the celebration. It meant the lamb. You could use the word Pascha to say lamb instead, essentially. And it was the first night of the unleavened bread. And Pesach was the kind of root. That's the Jewish terminology at that point. And you can see that very clearly in Exodus 12. It is the Lord's Passover. That was as far as the definition went. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night. And then a little bit later, as the Jews have left Egypt and have made settlement, the word has taken on its Hebrew meaning, which is Pesach this time. And what that meant is to skip over or to hop. And you see in the Bible that it took on a slightly different meaning. Again, the text didn't change, but it was, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Interestingly, the only time in the Bible it's used in the same manner is in Isaiah on a prophecy, when it says, like birds flying about, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending it, he will also deliver it. And there is the key point. How is he going to deliver it? He's going to do a passing over. He will preserve it. And that's the only other time that you have the word with its roots used in the same exact manner in the Bible. And then in the early Christianity, as the time passed, we started seeing something a little different in regards to the word. It became passion versus passage. So you had the Western churches using the word Pascha to signify the pains, the passions, and then you had the Eastern utilizing it as a passage. And the passage terminology was taken on by Origen, St. Cyril of Alexandria, St. Clement, St. Augustine. All of them utilized, when they talk about Holy Pascha Week, they talked about it as a passage, not as a passion. St. Cyril of Alexandria said, we pass over from the devil to Christ, and from this unstable world to his well-established kingdom. So the way the week started to be celebrated switched from, let me focus on passions, to our goal is not to weep for him. That's not the point of Holy Week alone, but to pass over with him from death to life. And that's the study, that's what the church fathers have adopted as a theme for celebrations during the Holy Week. And very quickly, we stopped referring to the week as a Holy Passion Week, which is a very Western tradition or a very Western method of celebrating the week. It became a Holy Pascha Week, and Pascha meaning passage at that point. So that's kind of the terminology of how it came about and what we should be referring to this week as. So I'll hopefully continue referring to it as Holy Pascha Week during this presentation. For us to understand this Holy Week, we really have to go back a little bit in time, and we have to get a good grasp on the Passover and its celebrations. And then to get a good grasp on the Passover, we really have to understand where the Passover came from, and it came from the 10th plague. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into history here to get a good understanding of what it is. Moses, in Exodus 3, 9-10, God comes to him and says, now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So that was the very first message from God to Moses in regards to what's about to happen next. And then from Exodus 7-10, we go through the 9 plagues that God brings upon Egypt at this time. And then God announces the 10th plague, which becomes the root of Judaism for a very long time. That's the very first celebration that God tells him to celebrate. And he says, and I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Afterwards, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out here together. So I'm going to read a small passage from Exodus 3 where you see a bunch of dots. I've skipped some text before and after because I'm trying to highlight a few specific points here. This month shall be your beginning of months. So this is God describing to Moses now how are you going to protect yourself from that 10th plague that I'm about to put on you? This month shall be the beginning of your month. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb. Now, and he describes different, what kind of lamb you can take. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night. It's the Lord's Passover. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. So for us to understand what God is asking the Israelites to do at this point, I think we really have to get a pretty good grip into what their days look like. We know that the days in the Old Testament or in the Jewish tradition, which is what it is until now, is from basically sunset to sunset. So if I were to look at this, it would be, let's say 5 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, would be the beginning of a day, the beginning of the new day and the end of one, and then into the next one, and right in between here would be sunrise. So I'm going to hopefully give you here a little bit of an insight of what that looked like. You can see a little bit of light at the very first, At the very first part here, there's a little bit of light, and then you go into darkness, and then you go into light, and it repeats again. Because God's instructions were very clear as to when you should be doing certain things. So back to that same text that we just read, and we see a mention of the month, we see a mention of the days of when you should be doing things, and times that you should be doing them. So I'm going to lay out the month of Nisan, which is the very first month that God tells the Israelites to keep as their main month, as their first month, and the days that are associated with it. We're going to go from day 10 to day 21, and we'll see in a minute as to why that is. And then each one of these is a full day in the Old Testament. So God tells them, and if you can see here on verse 3, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb. So that's when you start seeking out the lamb. And then God quickly says, keep it for 4 days, which was very interesting because you're going to keep it for 4 days, and then after the 4th day, you're going to take that lamb and you're going to kill it. And God's intent is He wants you to keep that lamb. He wants you to nourish it. Imagine being in a Jewish family at that time or an Israelite at this time, and you've got a bunch of kids, and you come home with this lamb. You tend to it, you care for it, you feed it, you take care of it, your kids play with it, and then 4 days later, you got to do this in front of your kids, and you got to kill that lamb, and you got to eat it. And there is a lot of wisdom in what is God asking of the Israelites to do with this lamb. He wants you to nourish it, grow close to it, love it, because something is going to happen to this lamb that's going to affect what the relationship between God and the Israelites at this time. And then from this point on, we have the 7 days of the unleavened bread. And I think we've grown to, in our works, in our schools, it's like Passover week. It's not a Passover week, it's a Passover day. That's what God intended it to be. The term started being used very loosely into combining the whole week together. No, Passover is actually the meal at the beginning. That's what the Passover is, because that's when God passes over. And then what comes after it is the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. So they're kind of two different events, two different holidays per se. So we're going to focus a little bit on that 14th day in a minute here, because I think that becomes the basis for a lot of what we have as Holy Week today. At the end of God's instructions to Moses, he tells him, "And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?'" And this is what happens on the Passover table today with the Jewish people. The youngest of the attendees asks why we're doing this, and the oldest is supposed to explain. And there is a whole tradition that follows exactly what went on at that time, and follows what God is asking to do, what God is asking them to do. So we have a good understanding of how the 10th plague came about, and I think it's time now to start talking about, okay, what happened after the Israelites left Egypt? The Exodus happened, they're settled in their new homes, in their new areas, and now they're celebrating this feast from here on because it was God's instructions that you're going to celebrate this thing forever. So I want you to imagine for a minute, it's old Jerusalem per se, and you are someone who is living through this time with a family. Imagine a time maybe 5-6 years before Christ's crucifixion, and you're celebrating this Passover quite often. And then comes the time of the year, you still don't know what's going to happen, but Christ will be crucified in this year, and you're going through the same motions of what's going on. It's very hard to, at that time, sometimes we say hindsight's 20/20. I think someone going through that time would, very hard for them to see what's about to happen or what this is. I'm not discounting the fact that Christ was preaching for 30 years prior to his crucifix, but at the same time, it's it's a lot of different things that are happening in a very short period of time to say, oh, this is a lamb that was intended by God to be the real sacrifice that's about to happen. So quickly, I want to go over a quick thing with the Passover. This is what a cedar plate, or the word cedar it means order, and this is what it would have. The Israelites have a shank bone, which is a symbol of the sacrifice that they made on that very last night. It has charoset, which is an apple cinnamon, which is significant of the mortar they used to build blocks and as slaves to the Egyptians. They have bitter herbs, which is the pains of slavery. A roasted egg, which signifies a new life. And the whole reason with the matzah, there was no yeast in it. It could not rise. And that's a symbol of how fast they needed to leave Egypt. They put their bread, and they could not wait for it to rise to leave before Pharaoh comes and gets them. And parsley, that's kind of a slightly newer thing for the bitterness of slavery. So, having said that you are this person that's living during this time, let's see some correlations between what happens during Holy Week as we know it today and what happened back then in the year of Christ. So we're familiar with this with this table, like we saw it already. Let's add on the days. And you can notice here quickly the difference between how we calculate our days and how the Jewish go about their days. If you see, for example, if you look at Sunday, the very first day, it starts in the darkness and ends in the darkness, as opposed to their day one starts in sunset and ends in sunset. So there's a few hours difference for you to appreciate here. On Sunday, Jesus enters Jerusalem. And if you see the correlation between that and seeking the Lamb, this is the time where Christ enters and people grow close to him, right? This is the time where, okay, I am now going to, if this is the new sacrifice, I'm going to be protective of it during this time. And Christ goes in and does a lot during those few days before his crucifix from the time he enters into Jerusalem. He goes in on Sunday, he cleanses the temple. On Monday, he walks out, and as he's traveling to Bethany, the fig tree gets cursed. On Tuesday, and again, I'm giving you some highlights, we call the Day of the Parables. On Wednesday, Mary pours the fragrant oil on him, and we see Judas starts the betrayal process. On Thursday, which is your Passover day, is the Last Supper with his disciples. Friday becomes the day of the crucifixion, slightly earlier in the day, and then it is finished by the end of Friday, yet not the end of the Jewish day. The sun still has not set, and we can see a lot of references in this when you read all the writings for Friday. Is that, he was taken off the cross before the end of the day because the next day was the Sabbath, and I think you can appreciate now what that means, because the Sabbath is right there. And then on Sunday, he resurrects. So you get this sequence of events that happen that are fairly and are very consistent with what God asked Moses to do with the Israelites during the Exodus time. So let's take all of that information now. Let's go for right around the 2nd century time here, with after Christ's crucifixion, resurrection, and let's see how the week was celebrated, or how the time was celebrated during this time. And it's quite interesting because comes the 2nd century, and we don't have a lot of data on what happened in the 1st century. There's a lot of extrapolations of what we know in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and we assume it happened in the 2nd. But there was no Holy Week in the 2nd and 3rd century. There was a short fast Friday and Sunday, and it came from the Gospel of St. Mark. It says, "But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and they shall fast in those days." The bridegroom was taken away when? Friday and Saturday, right? So those are the days that they thought need to be fasted. Why a whole week prior? And Easter was being celebrated on the Passover day. That was Easter. That was the day that we celebrated the resurrection of Christ. And it was very, you see the struggle between Judaism and Christianity as they're so close, but they're trying to separate to a certain extent a little bit. And you have all these similar holidays. The Christians, from some of the things I read, were almost sitting down at what looks like a Passover meal, but slightly different, yet the celebrations or the traditions were fairly similar. And in the wisdom of the church fathers in this age, there was a struggle between maybe the 2nd and the 3rd, early 4th century, where they're trying to separate the Judaism culture or traditions away from what the Christians were doing at this time. But I want to read you some things that I found on the celebrations in the beginning, because I think you guys have heard, I'm sure some of you have read, that it was a big deal, right? The celebration at that time, it was very close to Christ's death, and they were letting out prisoners, they were giving the slaves time to off from their work to celebrate. But the intent of how this was being done was very interesting, and I'm going to read you a small piece here from what I found. Their intention in letting prisoners out was to imitate the divine goodness by their own exercise of clemency during these days. And when the world owes its salvation to divine mercy, who are we to judge others at this point? Prisoners. That's it's kind of crazy to think about. You're opening the prisons on this one day of the year, and you're letting everyone out, except for those that would have caused danger. They're very clear about this. It could have danger to their families or other people. But it says, "Let the trespasses be forgiven. Let the bonds be taken off. Let the offenses be forgotten. Let revenge be stifled, and that thus the sacred feast may by both divine and human favors find us all happy and innocent." There was a point in time in the Parliament of Paris, which is a little bit later, obviously in the 2nd and 3rd century, but they would suspend any sessions. They would suspend any sessions where there is a sovereign power that says someone is supposed to be doing something. Who are we to stand when Christ gave up his life for us? Who are we to stand and to judge someone as to what he should be or should not be doing at this time? So they would close the courts during this time. So it comes around the 3rd century. It was extended to the entire week in certain areas, but it was not a full celebration amongst all the Christian worlds, Eastern and Western at this time. And no one fasted the full 6 days. And the whole wisdom of it is that it needed to grow a little bit further away from the Jewish traditions at this time. And right around that time, there was a struggle of, should it be Sunday? Should it be the Sunday after the Passover? Or should it be the day of the Passover? Because that's the day that Christ, was crucified. And in a lot of references, we can quickly say that Sunday was the Lord's day. And you can see that in the Old Testament and New Testament, it was the beginning of the week, the first day of the week. It was always the Sunday where the Lord intended it to be the Lord's day. So St. Cyril, Bishop of Jerusalem, was the very first person right around the 4th century which made it what it is today from a timing standpoint. 6 days before the Feast of the Resurrection. And at that time, there was a lot of pushback between him and the Church of Antioch and the Roman and Alexandria. Antioch, insisted on the fact that it's Easter and the Passover. They called them the 14ers. And then in Roman Alexandria, it was the Sunday following the Passover, up until the Council of Nicaea, which cleared it up completely. Sunday became the day which unified the celebrations, and we started celebrating the Feast of the Resurrection on Sunday, and 6 days prior to that was the celebration of the Holy Week. Around the 12th century, Patriarch Gabriel III put a team together, an organization which basically came up with a lot of the writings that we have today, is what makes up the Pascha book, short some things, which came in the 13th century by Ibn al-Asal, who put all the expositions and a lot of the explanations that are happening. But the Pascha book, as we know it today, has been roughly from the 12th century. So that's I'm going to call it the evolution of how the week came about and how the celebration was intended to be. I'm going to get into a little bit of rites, and I think this is kind of the last section that I want to focus on here. Agbeya prayers, it's the one time in the year that we stop praying from the Agbeya completely, it's during Holy Week. Because it's the only time in the year that we have substituted the Agbeya's work into another book. And we'll go into that a little bit deeper in a minute here. But the Psalms and the litanies are all adjusted accordingly to follow the hours. And the Pascha book acts as a substitute for the Agbeya during this time. So how does it do that? In all of our Pascha books and our celebrations, the day is split into two. It's split into a morning and an evening, essentially. And every day has a first hour, or every section of a day has a first hour. It has a third hour. It has a 6th, a 9th, and finally an 11th hour. So you can see 5 different hours. And each hour gets broken down into 10 sections. We have prophecies and poetry. There's about 2 to 5 prophecies every hour. Good Friday has up to 20 of them in 1 hour. And then majority of them come from the book of Isaiah, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, as it contains a lot of the suffering of Christ. And generally, you're going to see it like this. One prophecy explains how Jerusalem is going to treat the Messiah, and then the rest of the prophecies discuss the importance of wisdom, the fear of God, righteousness. So we're learning about what happened to him and what his ways are. So, hopefully when you attend, an hour from the beginning and you can read through the prophecies, look for those themes, because they're very helpful to shape what the hour is going to be for you. The next point is going to be homilies, which are basically church fathers and their interpretation of some of these events. Then it's followed by the doxology of the Pascha, which is Thine is the Glory, the hymn that we all know now. the Gospels, and what, there's you're going to find that in the beginning of the week, we'll read more from St. Matthew as the week progresses, and we get into Bright Saturday. We're reading more from St. John. Comes the eve of Thursday and the eve of Good Friday, and Thursday, and we're reading all four Gospels. The expositions, which we know came around the 13th century from Ibn al-Asal, which are, again, further explanations of some things. The litanies, which are our supplications to God during this time. The 12 Lord have mercies, the final hymn, and then the benediction that Abuna gives at the end of the service. So those are the 10 sections for what each hour has, and it follows the same protocol. So that's the first rite that we, and again, I don't have all the rites here, but I've picked out the four main ones. The next one is being outside the altar, and I think that's a very unique one in our church, because what happens is we're following the Old Testament's writing, which is the whole bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place, where the ashes are poured out and burned in wood with fire. Christ's suffering took place outside of Jerusalem. And the first section of our church, which we pray the Pascha days, is a representation of Jerusalem, the city of the believers. As we celebrate Christ himself on the altar, for example, on Thursday, we're allowed to go inside the altar during this time. But the whole point of being outside is because the church is making a point here that we are to stay outside. The altar is not a pathway back and forth. We are trying to live the life of being out away from that salvation that's about to come to us. The black drapes are very interesting, right? It happens outside. You don't see black drapes inside the altar because that's where Christ is. So you see the whole church is dressed in black outside of the altar. And that's because of, in Philippians, St. Paul says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his suffering. The next rite is sacraments. And it's hard to say that there's not a single time in the church where we're not performing a sacrament of some type, right? But during this week, we do stop essentially all the sacraments except for one, and that's repentance and confession, because this is the perfect time for it. Because it's full focus on the Passover and the suffering of Christ. And again, be careful with this, because it's not the suffering of Christ, it's the passage of suffering that gets us to where we need to. One sacrament is allowed, like I said, which is the repentance and confession. And what the church did in its wisdom, the sixth Sunday of Lent becomes the Sunday of baptismals. You're about to stop baptisms for a week. Let's get everyone in on the sixth week of Lent and get all the baptisms done. And that was the rite of passage in the old church, where all the believers would get baptized actually on day of Easter, and it was kind of organic. Like, this is the day of the resurrection. This is the day of the resurrection. This is the day you've been saved, and this is the day you're going to get baptized. But that changed now to the sixth Sunday of the Lent. And then the very last one I'm going to touch on here is hymnology, and I'm not going to try to do audio here, but this is really the time where you see a significant change in what happens in our church as we change our tunes, as we transition from, I'm not sure, this is not playing, as we transition our tunes and get into a slightly deeper spiritual level with utilizing music, utilizing the hymns, utilizing the way that we go through our readings and so on. And that was in the churches, right? The hymns that are used during Holy Week are some of the oldest hymnology that is known to us, and some of these tunes are obviously being used until the day that we are today. And that's basically it. I think that's a quick summary of what goes on during this whole week. There is so much, and there's so much confusing stuff, to say the least, here between all the different churches and the different avenues that some writers have gone into, because of, I mean, you can go into a rabbit hole with how to count the 3 days that Christ was in the tomb. There's so many different writings. There's beliefs that, and again, the intention is not to confuse you, but it's a good area to research and to get deeper in. A lot of the writings in Gospels speak of the Sabbath and speak of the Passover. As you can see, there was the Passover celebration, and then there was the Sabbath right before it. So there's a lot of scholars that talk about the difference between the two periods of time and which one was intended when St. Mark said the Sabbath or said the celebration. Is it this? Is it that? But there's a lot of dense information that you can get into with this one. And that's basically it. Yes?
So you mentioned the point about under the sacraments, and you're maybe not the sacraments. You were saying how we share in his sufferings, but you made it a point to say, but it's not just in his sufferings with the Passover of our sufferings. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that goes back a lot to how, in the early times, the suffering and the resurrection were almost like treated as one. You were celebrating his crucifixion, his resurrection. It was one holiday. It was one thing. The point of the suffering is the gain that we get at the end, right? So what if there was suffering but there was no resurrection? There's no Christianity. If there was no resurrection, there's no Christianity. There was just a suffering. This man suffered on the cross. So the focus in the Western tradition earlier on was on the suffering. Look how much he suffered. Look how much he suffered. Look what he went through. But the focus was not on the fact that he beat death by his own death and he resurrected. And that's what undermined the Holy Week, and that's why the Eastern Church really grew very deep into using it as a passage and not a passion. So that's what I meant by it, because some people, the whole point of utilizing the suffering as a pathway is because you want to maintain the suffering spirit into after the passage has happened. We don't want to forget about the suffering of Holy Week. As soon as the resurrection happens, we want to maintain that, and the only way to do that is to focus on the resurrection, not to focus on the suffering, because the suffering ends. The suffering ended on Good Friday.
Yeah, when our Lord Jesus Christ was carrying the cross and was humiliated, falling down, and he looked around and he see people crying. And what he said to them, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Do not weep for me. Because it's not a emotional thing to lose the focus on a gift that we were about to receive, redemption of mankind and the salvation of mankind. So don't get carried away of just the passion that I'm running through, but also look what this is the fulfillment of the incarnation. He was incarnate for the purpose of redemption and for saving the mankind in total. So don't just ponder or focus or stop at the passion or the beat and the humiliation of him, and that's what when we celebrate Good Friday, it's mixed up with some sadness. It's for ourselves, saddened for ourselves, not for Christ, for ourselves, and some joy also because we received salvation and redemption. So they are both together, and that's the moment of transition at the night of Bright Saturday. And you see the tunes changing because we're sad, not because Christ died, but also is for us. We're transitioning from waiting for the salvation that we're about to receive and the resurrection. Through him, we resurrected with him. We died with him and we resurrected with him. So that was the transition. And you see the tunes changing from one hymn, the same hymn, starts sad and end up joyous. And that's the focus and the... Thank you, Mark. We have another question.
So forgive me if this is a little bit of a complicated question. You mentioned before of like not going down the rabbit hole with specifics on certain days and certain things, but something that I've always kind of wondered about is could you go into a little bit more detail about the timing of things, especially how Passover and our observation of the Holy Pascha week and of Great Friday and Easter Sunday relates with things like the astronomy portion of it, and why some days, so like this year, for example, the Passover is actually on the Catholic week and not the Coptic week of Pascha, which is unusual, at least in my lifetime. I'm not familiar with another situation where that happens. So could you go into more specifics about that?
Sure, I'm going to do my best, but stop me, Abuna, if I go down the rabbit hole. There are some things that I read that are... So let me backtrack. The Passover is celebrated on a full moon. So what happened is they look at the astronomy, they look at the full moon, and that becomes the day that you decide when it's going to happen. But that became a problem at some time because the Christians depended on the Jews to tell them when the Passover day is so they can celebrate Easter. And due to the lack of communications, there were cities, towns, and areas where did not know about the finding of the moon because it was a 2-day travel and they may have celebrated 2 days before, or they may have celebrated a month before because they're so far away from the mothership that says when the Passover is going to be. And that was part of the reason why the Christians said, we need to deviate a little bit from the, celebrating on the 14th on the day of the Passover, and we're going to celebrate on the Sunday after. So that's the first point. The second point, which is something that Abuna John went into last meeting, about how Lent came about and what are the holidays, and I think it was very, very, it's recorded, so it would shed a lot of light onto this, but how the 40 days of fast counted, and there are 3 different ways that count, and he said something that resonated with me so well. He's like, there is so many different ways. All we know is that we have it as we have it today, and that's really what we should focus on. It doesn't matter how you count it. So that's the second point. The first point is that we depended on the Jews to figuring out the time, and then we decided to switch over to our own calendar, per se. And then the second thing is that the way the fast changed over the years from Lent into Holy Week played a big part in why we celebrate differently than we do, or closer far from them at this point. I think the last point to answer this question as best as I can here is the fact that and again, I keep, it took me a week where I came back to Abuna Carlos and I said, Abuna, I don't think I can talk on this. And he said, why? I said, I can't get over all the different information that I'm getting from 10 different books that are saying 10 different things, and it was very hard to grasp. And eventually I said, okay, what does the church believe? What does the church say? What are our church fathers and their wisdom have carried on to us at this point? And I said, let me focus on that first. Instead of trying to find the truth, let me go to it first from where it is, and let me work my way backwards. And it was very easy to do that, actually. It changes your mindset a little bit into, all right, this is my baseline. And the baseline is, there are claims he was crucified on a Wednesday. There are claims that he was crucified on a Tuesday. There were claims that he was crucified on a Thursday, on a Friday, but on a Friday later in the day. And a lot of the references that you look at are trying to say Sunday was a resurrection. So let me work my way backwards. So give me 3 days. Well, 3 days, in what sense? Is it 3 days in the Jews, in Judaism where it's sunset to sunset, 3 days in the Gregorian calendar? Or did sunset to sunset during the Jewish time was called Wednesday? Was Wednesday sunset to sunset, or Wednesday was always defined as 12 to 12? So you get into crazy amount of information, I think. And what I'm going to tell you, what I did to try to get a good grasp on it, and it makes a lot of sense now, is looking at it from our church resources, and then working my way backwards to challenge the other ideas that I saw, that I found, and I was able to cross off a lot of things. I'm like, this makes no sense. It couldn't make sense if I look at it with that baseline. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it, but I don't know if I answered your question in full, but it is a very complicated answer to get to the bottom line of it. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, I think I missed it when you explained how we transitioned from having it from 2 days to a week. Did you explain that? Or can you explain
Yeah,
that?
so what happened is, because of the verse in St. Mark, chapter 20, I think, 22, it said that when the bridegroom is taken away from them, they should fast for these days. That was the origin of the celebration of 2 days. And then we have references from a nun in Jerusalem that tells us about how this celebration was done, and it wasn't, Palm Sunday was not a huge part of it. It was just a regular celebration, regular liturgy. But then they kind of walked the pathway of Christ in different areas during this time, and I believe that kind of was the time frame or the basis of how the 6 days came about. I don't know exactly why they decided on 6 days prior, but when you look at how, let me go back, see if I can do this easier here. But when you go back on the times that, oh, that moved quick. On how the choosing the Lamb and Christ, and you count back, that's 6 days. So it became the journey of Christ getting into Jerusalem, and that was a celebration of Holy Week. Yeah.
So I had a question about the homilies.
Sure.
I realized that the homilies are only read in the morning. We'll never read them at night. So that was like the first question, and I realized also that it's only 4 of the fathers that we read them from. Why those specific 4 in particular?
Morning, we have different, like prostration is only taking place in the morning, for example. And the hours of the morning are different from the hours of the night. Yes, we have even the tilba, the litanies at the end of the morning are different from the night. There are some, like the homilies are added only in the morning hours, not at night. It could be because of they insert it because it has the time and also follows the theme of the whole day, but it's not repeated at night. But why the 4 fathers? I would say not all the fathers maybe wrote about the Passion or specific, but it fits the meaning of this hour or the theme of this hour. And some homilies, I want to tell you, are being canceled out nowadays because the meaning doesn't fit nowadays. They looked at it again, and one of the homilies, they say, nah, it shouldn't be read. So after all these years, these certain homilies are taken out because it doesn't fit the theme at all, or the meaning is not correctly fits the whole theme. I don't remember the hour exactly, but there was a homily. I can search it exactly to you. That's one, yes, and that's not read anymore. Another also, طرح اللي هو إيه الطرح اللي هو expositions. One exposition, we stopped reading it. It has to do like cursing out Judas' wife. That's so we don't say it out, or we don't read it because it's not necessary and it's not really fitting. Yeah. So yeah. Anybody else has any questions? But I want to tell you also on beauty of the hymns. during the Holy Week. And the spirituality of the hymns. Hymns can be just few words, but it can take 20 minutes at a time to sing it. So, and it's always sung in Coptic. Homogenes, beautiful hymn, wrote by Saint Athanasius. Beautiful hymn. Golgotha, and that's the hymn of taken from Pharaoh's time. When they bury a pharaoh, a king, that's the same tune they used, but the church used the music of it, the tune of it, and they put the words to fit. If you go to Africa nowadays, we have Coptic churches in Africa. They have their own tunes. That's culturally accepted, and that's how they celebrate a liturgy or something. They put the words into their music. So as Copts, we put the words, as a church, words, into our music. And that was the music or the hymns of our church back then. They inherited from their forefathers. Basically, yes, we're descendants of the pharaohs or from old Egyptians, and that's our music. Golgotha. Did you guys see the golden, what is it called? El parade of the kings of Egypt? And you see the music that really everybody loved to hear and listen to it. It was taken from the old time, and the words are taken from the old ancient Egyptian words. So the church kept the hymns, and they put the words to fit the hymns, and that's what we celebrate. What I want to say that a few words can take 20 minutes or so to sing it, such as Pekathronos. So it's not the word, because the words are so, okay, your throne, O Lord, is forever and ever, right? That's how many words? 5 words. But the third dimension of the words is the tune, is the music that makes you feel part of what's going on in that hour when our Lord Jesus Christ was crucified, humiliated, and treated like a prisoner or a killer or a murderer. But at the same time we tell him, your throne, O Lord, is forever and ever. How can we take him, accept him as Lord while he was crucified and weak? But the hymns starts very low and takes you up and claiming that he's living forever and ever. Sha'ine, nim sha'ine, forever and ever. And you feel the hymns is taking you and gives you that meaning of the few words that we are saying. Anybody else has any questions? Thank you so much, Mark. Great job. We have it streamed, so that means it's going to be archived. We're going to send it and have it posted on the website of the church for future, if you want to look at it and listen to it again. Thank you so much, and we're going to be calling for you again to help and prepare. Yeah, it's not one-time deal. It's all the time. Great job, and thank you. Let's stand up to pray, and we'll end it over here.